Finding the equilibrium between costs, service level, and the amount of cash coming in is a constant battle in any modern-day company. This daily struggle is captured in a concept known as the supply chain triangle, which was conceived by today's guest, Bram Desmet, a professor in supply chain and operations at Vlerick Business School. So Bram, thanks very much for joining us today. Perhaps to start off, you could just tell us a little bit more about your company, Solventure, and also a bit about your background.
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this exciting series of interviews and talks. Very honored to talk about myself and the triangle here. So my name is Bram Desmet. As you correctly mentioned, now for around 10 years, I'm a professor in supply chain and operations at Vlerick Business School. Actually, most of my assignments for Vlerick are abroad. I do most of my teaching in statistics and operations research at Peking University, which is highly regarded university in China. And now since almost approximately 10 years, I'm running Solventure as a company and as the CEO. And as Solventure, we implement sales and operations planning, primarily in production companies. And well, after 10 years with Solventure and 20 years in my career, most of it's in supply chain, I came up with that concept of the supply chain triangle on which we will talk today, because for me it really captures the essence of the struggle I see in many companies, and where we believe S&OP is one of the processes which can help to bring better balance in that famous supply chain triangle.
Okay, brilliant. So perhaps we should just dive straight in then, and perhaps you could just sort of give us a brief sort of overview of the supply chain triangle and how that actually works.
With pleasure. So, as I mentioned, after many years in the field and in consulting, I discovered that companies struggle with balancing service, cost, and cash. And I'll give a couple of examples. I see that companies start buying in the Far East. Why do they do that? They do that to reduce the cost, but they ignore that because of the longer lead times or the more difficult quality control, the inventory will go up. Or marketing people are very eager to expand the product portfolio because they believe it will improve the service towards the customer and it will be good for the sales revenue. And if you introduce 20% new products, you risk that the top line is not going up with 20%. So you really risk introducing a long tail of more slow moving products, which means that the average inventory turns go down, or on average you need more inventory. And then finance for sure has become more concerned with inventory because inventory is cash. And if you look at larger companies, you can easily have 100 million or a couple of hundred millions of euros which are tied up in inventory. So if finance is doing or planning an acquisition, they want to know with the inventory to free up the cash. So I've also seen supply chain managers which try to free up cash by bluntly lowering the safety stocks. But if you lower the safety stocks, well, the inventory will go down, but you will get service issues. And if you have service issues, you get all kinds of operational firefighting costs. So in the last 10 years, I've seen in smaller companies and bigger companies that it's like a ball that companies are trying to put flat, but then they push on the service and then the inventory goes up, or then they reduce the inventory, but they have service issues and cost issues. So it seems very hard for companies to find a good equilibrium in that supply chain triangle.
Okay, great. And we'll get onto that idea of finding equilibrium a little bit later. As always, we're joined by Joannès. So Joannès, what are your initial thoughts on this concept? How does it kind of fit in with your idea of the quantitative supply chain?
Very much. It's very funny, you know, I started Lokad as the idea, if you look on the way back archive, as Lokad forecasting as a service, you know, and thus I was pretty much focused on initially on improving the accuracies, the percentages of error, and I realized that it took us a few years, you know. To my defense, I was fresh out of university, but it took us a few years, but we realized that frequently we were just fighting initially just the wrong battles, you know. Improving accuracy is, I mean, yes, in itself, it's not a bad thing, but it's, if you don't put into the picture all those, the Lokad terminology for that is what we call the economic drivers. and how all those economic drivers, conflict each other, then basically you end up optimizing the wrong thing and mostly not delivering any added value. So indeed, this trilemma that you described, with three things where you end up with this whack-a-mole situation where you can slap something and then the other one goes back, and just like the game for children where there is always one head that comes up and you have to whack-a-mole. You have like maybe three dominant, corners, and you have many sub-corners that are maybe smaller, but you have actually plenty of them. With extra dimensions, with that can still hurt you, that are not as dominant, but you can have problem with inventory obsolescence. You can have problems with product freshness if you're into food, which is not exactly something that you lose, that your clients don't like it so much, so it's kind of a variant of the service. Or if you have too much inventory and you're in fashion, you're going to do more sales. If you do more sales, you're kind of getting your clients used to buy at a discount, so that becomes a struggle for the next season to sell stuff for price. So it's another angle with a service, also a variant. So yes, this concept is quite frequently present, and I think we are struggling, and our clients too, very, very frequently. It's literally, I think, the rule.
Okay, so Joannès mentioned there a really interesting word was the idea of a trilemma. So you've got three sort of decisions that you've got to balance between. I mean, Bram, what were you sort of observing in the industry, and what did you observe over the last sort of decade, how people were reacting towards that trilemma?
My first result or conclusion was that companies really struggle. And then I started questioning, like, how does that come that companies struggle with the balance in the triangle? And what I've discovered is that in a lot of organizations, people in sales are primarily driven by service, because service is driving the top line and the sales revenue and the growth. And so you could say that salespeople in that sense are primarily pulling that top side of that triangle. I've seen that operations people are primarily driven by cost, efficiency, and in a sense are primarily pulling the cost side of the triangle. And in some companies, that's the eternal debate. It seems like an eternal debate between sales and operations, and it's like they are both pulling a rope. And as a result, I do see that inventories make huge swings. So I see companies which finish the year end with 100 million of inventory, and then 3 months later they are at 135, which is a 35% increase. It's 35 million which needs to be financed by somebody. And then finance steps in, and finance says, no, we need to play this game with less inventory and with lower inventories. So finance is primarily driving the cash aspect, and when you bring in the cash aspect, that's when you really close that triangle. And when you close the triangle, you get depression. And so that's my understanding, that the tension in the triangle or the pressure in the triangle is due to the fact that a lot of companies are still working in silos and still have strong functional KPIs. And that brought me to another question that somebody once asked me. He said, Bram, I like the story of the triangle, but is this not how companies work? Won't there always be conflicting objectives between sales and operations, and will different departments not always speak a different language? And though that's a fair question, because it does seem the dominant mode of operating still today. And then comes an interesting tweak, because if you look at the triangle from an investor's perspective, that's when it really changes the game. And how do we link it to an investor's perspective? I say, well, if I look at the service side of the corner, well, service in the end is a driver for top line growth, sales revenue. If I'm improving my service and nothing happens to the top line, then something is wrong. Then maybe I'm in a difficult market. But as an investor, I'm not only interested in growth or in top line, I also want to see a margin. Well, if I combine the top line with the cost side of the triangle, then I get to the margin.
Okay, Joannès, what were your thoughts on that question then? Would you think there'll always be this conflict between sales and operations, and is that a conflict that you've kind of observed?
Again, Yes, I'm not going to be a good debater, contradicting you on that, but absolutely, and it's actually quite interesting, that you've done that, because Lokad, although it was relatively empirical, in the end we built, a predictive optimization technology that was where the main point was to pretty much balance together all those economic drivers. So what you're describing, is we are getting close to the sort of initial baby step that Lokad took in this direction, to think of, for every extra €1 or $1 that I put in inventory, what is the payback? So and then to start thinking of having every single product that I can produce compete for my cash. So a question, and then you go back to, colloquially, you would say it's your bangs for your bucks, and you have the more scientific term, which is something like return on capital expenditure, I believe. But fundamentally, it's pretty much this key idea. And where I would say where it was a long journey for Lokad was to have a technology where we can, I would say, integrate so much diversity in terms of drivers into one optimization, because people say it's better if software is like super modular, and I would say yes, it's true. But when you're trying to do like end-to-end supply chain optimization, in the end you need to bring all those factors integrated into one single numerical recipe, and it's not, you can't just split that into sub-problems just because you really want some kind of numerical optimization to balance out all those forces. So it needs to have something that connect all those forces, and then you end up with something where the main challenge becomes how do you deal software-wise with all this complexity.
Okay, Bram, Joannès sort of mentioned it there, this idea of economic drivers. When it comes to the supply chain triangle, what is it that you're trying to optimize? I mean, how do you find that balance between service, cash, and cost?
From a tooling perspective, we can try to model that balance, and we can look at what are the dollars invested in inventory, and what are the margins that are coming out of a result, and what would that be for existing products, and what would that potentially be for new products. And so in any case, looking at two sides of the equation, you need to look at margins, and you need to look at what is the capital employed or the capital invested. And capital employed on the one hand is the working capital, so that is inventory, receivables, payables, and that's also your investment in fixed assets. So also, if I have a very fragmented product portfolio, most probably I will need more assets to be able to produce them. If I'm a low cost player, I don't want to have a wide variety of products because it's killing my efficiency. So typically I will produce more volume on the same assets, or try to use my assets more intensively. So it's always about looking at margins. That's why I came up with that triangle concept, because it's simple enough that everybody understands. So explaining supply chain to salespeople can be hard, because only if they hear the word supply chain, they start sweating. And for me, the essence of supply chain is balancing that triangle. That's something that everybody can relate to. It's also something that they experience as their daily struggle, and getting them on board in a kind of a change journey, and making them understand what supply chain is about in non-technical terms, so that at least they are willing to make their contribution, for instance, in a forecasting or in a product portfolio decision. That's where I hope that this triangle can really deliver value for also any customers Lokad, for instance, would be working with today.
Yeah, I mean, Joannès, I think you probably agree with that one, that from a kind of strategical perspective, it's very hard to get all of the sort of key stakeholders on board if there's a lot of concepts they don't fundamentally understand.
Yes, or sometimes they are not super incentivized to understand them as well. Sometimes they understand it very well, but just a simple anecdote. For example, with one prospect, we were moving forward a few years ago. Imagine it's a large retail network, and in the stores, inventory serves to simplify two purposes. One is to serve the client. So when somebody walks into the store, they will find what they want. But there was also the fact that there was the merchandising angle, which was the store has to be full so that it's very appealing and that people, like the brand and like to come back. But so when we started to quantify the fact that, for every euro that there was in the store, it could either belong to, supply chain, fundamentally there to serve clients, or to marketing because the stock was there, but mostly for marketing purposes. And thus they were making an investment that was competing with the money they were spending, let's say, on TV ads. Suddenly when you start, putting those quantitative tools in place, if marketing just realized that you're going to push back to them 50 million euros worth of inventory and tell them, well, this inventory is not really, allocated because of supply chain. It's a marketing investment that competes with your other marketing investments. Suddenly, it's not actually super technical, but you might have super strong incentive to not, understand that very clearly because you just don't want to have all this money being pushed back, all those investment being pushed back to your budget. So actually at Lokad, it's probably this sort of political battles is actually the second reason why we kind of, at pilot stage, we lose clients. The first one is because data is a mess and we never managed to extract all the basic data that we would need. That's the first root cause for failure, in those initiatives. But the second one, just after, is the aftermath of trying to bring together all people with, I would say, an end-to-end financialization of the supply chain.
And Bram, what would you say your experiences were here? I mean, is it easy to prove tangible benefits if you're sort of using this idea of the supply chain triangle? Does that make it easier for people to become on board with maybe a new quantitative approach?
I think today that triangle is in a stage that we use it to do the change management really on the top level in the organization. We're not that far, and I've not seen any organization which is using the return on capital employed as an operational metric. I do see companies who use it more on a strategic level. For instance, if they do strategic investments, like what will it do to our return on capital employed? So I think today it's helping to have a different kind of debate and to create the required change in alignment, in metrics alignment, to make sure that companies adopt, for instance, more powerful supply chain solutions, which then can actually help them drive that. But there's still a lot of work to be done even there. I see one of my personal missions in life is to make sure that supply chain is not seen as something operational, but supply chain is seen as something strategic and contributing to the business value. So you could almost say that today with the triangle we are addressing the senior management and we have good chats there, but with the current implementations we are doing, a lot of it is again, let's say, on the nitty-gritty details, and connecting the two is still a challenge, but that's what we made our mission of, so to speak. And I'm also sure that once companies really see that connection and make that connection, they will understand that supply chain is most probably the most overlooked value driver, but we are not yet there. Companies still think it's still much more popular to create value by buying another company, or by expanding into a new regional market, or by launching a major new R&D program and a major new product, where most value is basically within the alignment that can be done within that triangle. So most of the value can be unlocked by supply chain solutions, but there's still a way to go to make decision makers in organization, and certainly if it's not supply chain people fully understand and fully realize.
Okay, Johannes, we'll start sort of wrapping things up. Would you agree with that? Would you say companies are ready to sort of see supply chain as a much more strategic kind of part of their business?
Frankly, I don't know. I mean, what I do know is that it's very funny because Lokad, we did end up kind of to the same point, but through a completely different journey. Actually, we started with the idea of generating mundane supply chain decisions automatically, all of them. So we were like fully operational from day one in terms of spirit of what we wanted to do. And the funny thing was, we realized with our clients that many decisions were nonsense. Not necessarily because the forecast was bad. Sometimes there was problems with forecasting and whatnot, statistics. But what was striking is that most of the time, the very bad decisions were just because we started to realize that we were just missing an angle. And sometimes it's a fairly simple but brutal angle. An example, aerospace, you buy a part for an aircraft, a part that is going to live for 3 decades, so it's a repairable part, and you buy a part that has 3 decades of lifetime for an aircraft that in 5 years will not be allowed to either fly in North America or Europe. So basically, you buy a part and you know that this part will only be used for just a few years. And so it's a very bad strategic investment. And so bottom line, if you decide to buy a lot of those, it's very bad. It's not statistics. It's just a core business insight. And so that's how we realized that we were having those business insights, so that we started to, under the umbrella of the idea of economic drivers, to bring them in. And then we realized as we were playing this whack-a-mole game, because Lokad, we were playing the whack-a-mole game with how do we make the nonsense decision. We stopped generating nonsense decision out of Lokad every single day, because we were generating, how much should I produce? How much stock should I buy from my suppliers? Where should I put my stock? Just for every single SKU. And there was, for years, we were struggling with nonsense. We are still struggling, marginally with that. But ultimately, it was all about integrating those different economic drivers that led you there. So it's interesting because it didn't happen with a big, nowadays we try to present this vision, but historically, when we started to do that with our clients, it was not something with like a grand plan. It was more like, let's get those decisions generated automatically so that people would not spend thousands of man hours dealing with that, with those mundane stuff, but try to avoid produce nonsense and not even necessarily start doing something super optimized. I'm just talking of let's have decisions that are like decent, which was a fairly modest objective. And it turned out that if you want to have like a decent supply chain decision, as opposed to I would say a moronic one, you need to embrace those factors. Otherwise, you end up with things that are very bizarre and usually very wrong also as well.
Okay, we're going to leave the last word to our guest today. Bram, if you're a supply chain practitioner watching this, what's the first step you should take if you want to identify your own supply chain triangles and ultimately see supply chain as a key part of your business's strategy?
Well, that's an open door. Of course, you need to buy my book.
Shameless plug.
We will put a link in the
we'll put a link in the description.
In the description of the video.
No, so I think in general, the challenge I see coming up for the supply chain community is when I present that supply chain triangle and also the consequence of that triangle, like when it comes to KPIs, I say if you look at inventory, we can make every function responsible for inventory because everybody has an influence. But the problem becomes that if everybody is responsible, then nobody seems to be responsible. So there is a limit to shared targets. So when you want to manage the triangle, I really believe that I'm fine with salespeople having a sales focus, and I'm fine with production people having an efficiency and a cost focus. What we need in the future is a function which actively manages the balance in the triangle. So I'm a big fan of having supply chain being independent from sales, from operations, from finance, supply chain not being in the operation. So supply chain for me is not customer service or logistics. Logistics is an operational function. So really have supply chain in the center of that triangle, actively balancing and challenging the organization and saying, okay, dear salesperson, you will do this or that, or dear operations person, you are going to do this or that. So continuously challenge decisions made on each of the corners in the light of the overall balance and the return on capital employed. Putting supply chain at the heart of that triangle with S&OP as a tactical process, financial forecasting and planning and budgeting also as some kind of tactical process, and strategic planning as processes. That's my vision for supply chain. And if people read my book, I'd be most happy to see what are their thoughts. I'm a bit looking for feedback also on that aspect, but I would almost say make up your mind. So either you will become ambitious and you want to claim the center of the triangle and you want to have the supply chain role evolve from more operational into more tactical strategic, or yeah, either you will be good in execution and the daily heartbeat, which is also fine, but that will then be more an operational function for me under the COO than the true supply chain function.
Okay, great. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you both for your time.
Thank you.
So that's everything for today. If you agree, disagree, if you want to join the debate, and if you like Bram's book, make sure you drop us a comment below. That's everything for this week, and we'll see you again in the next episode. Bye for now.